I'm Nima Rajan, and this is Forum Daily Week in Review. As the war in Ukraine continues to dominate media headlines, abuses in other countries, including China, continue. According to human rights groups, over 1 million Uyghurs have been detained against their will in China's Xinjiang region. Multiple news organizations have reported a large network of detention camps that China refers to as re-education camps, where detainees are subject to unspeakable abuses. Forum Daily has conducted numerous interviews on the Uyghur genocide with first-hand testimony of physical, emotional, and sexual abuse in these detention camps. World leaders have increased efforts to hold China accountable for what human rights organizations say are crimes against humanity. But has this made any impact on the abuses that have been occurring in the country for years? Well, joining us now to give us more insight into the ongoing human rights abuses in China is Ms. Yaqiu Wang, senior China researcher at Human Rights Watch. Ma'am, welcome to Forum Daily.
Thank you for having me.
Now, we know abuses against China's Uyghur population and other minority groups have been brought to the world stage. We know Human Rights Watch has played a key role in this. So where are we now when it comes to the Uyghur genocide? Has there been any impact from this advocacy?
Well, first of all, we don't know much what's going on inside Xinjiang because the government doesn't allow independent journalists going to the region to investigate. And of course, everybody in the region is scared to death to talk about what happened to them. And, WhatsApp, Facebook, and a lot of international social media is blocked in Xinjiang. And if you dare to install WhatsApp in your phone, you can get years in jail. So we don't know much. That being said, there have been, satellite image evidences of people being transferred from those so-called re-education camps into formal prisons, and some are forced into go to factories to be forced labor. So I don't think, the situation has changed much, but there's some commotions.
It's unfortunate to hear that the situation hasn't really changed. Now, in terms of the media attention on the war in Ukraine, how do you see this impacting international efforts to hold China accountable for these human rights abuses?
I think there are two folds. One is that the Russia's invasion of Ukraine really made people realize you should not appease dictators because Europe was appeasing Putin, and this could happen to China too, especially in the context of Taiwan. So I think people are waking up to the fact that you should not make deals with dictators. But on the other hand, it's unfortunate to see that because Europe and the US are so occupied with the Ukraine war, they have the attention, the resources to counter China. You can see that especially Europe is quite distracted.
Definitely. Now, in terms of other human rights abuses occurring in China, we know your research looks into freedom of expression, internet censorship, and video surveillance, which continue to be ongoing issues in the country. Can you give us more insight into this?
Well, in terms of internet censorship, I would say, China has the most sophisticated internet censorship in the country. It's not that all these apps we enjoy here in the US, like Twitter, Facebook, Reddit, are censored in China. It's also that China has its own versions of Twitter, Facebook, everything. So people inside the country doesn't feel that they don't have internet freedom because they have everything. As long as you don't talk about politics, you enjoy the same kind of entertainment, maybe better than we enjoy in the US or in Canada. This is one thing. The other is the surveillance. Well, I would say, China probably has the best surveillance in the world. Everybody is subject to pervasive surveillance. There are numerous cameras all over the country. The worst situation is in Xinjiang. Then the government is, at the forefront of facial recognition, and not to mention, you have to use your real name for everything in the country. We can register account using a Gmail that is not attached to our real identity. This is impossible in China.
You can only imagine how difficult this could make for people to stand up against some of these human rights abuses in the country. Now, what does holding China accountable look like for you, and how big of an impact could this make? Is holding the country accountable enough?
Well, because let's talk about the first step, holding the country accountable. And I think it's very hard given how powerful China is. But I feel we're closer to that than, let's say, in a year ago. The UN, let's say, China has tremendous influence in the UN. But in August, the UN published a report says, the crimes happening in Xinjiang could amount to crimes against humanity. That's a big thing given the context of how China would say, manipulate the human rights mechanism in the UN. So, we're still far away from holding the CCP accountable.
With violent crime on the rise, the Canadian Association of Chiefs of Police is calling for a meeting with the premiers to discuss the safety of Canada's officers. Now, this was spelled out in a letter addressed to the chair of the Council of the Federation, Manitoba Premier Heather Stefanson. In it, the president of the Canadian Association of Chiefs of Police, Danny Smythe, requested this urgent meeting. The association would like to discuss the rise in violent crime, bail reform, and the recent killings of police officers. The letter highlights concern for the safety of officers amid a rise in guns, gangs, drugs, and violence. It notes the impact of mental health and addiction on the rise in violent crime and the increasing issue of repeat offenders. Well, joining us now to unpack the objectives of the meeting with the premiers is Chief Danny Smythe himself. Sir, welcome to Forum Daily.
Thank you. Good to be with you.
Now, in addition to highlighting this rise in violent crime in Canada, what would be the main objectives of this meeting with the premier, sir?
Well, as policing in Canada is generally provincial jurisdiction, I think it's a timely meeting. As I speak to my colleagues across the country, I recognize that many of us are facing the same problems, and you've outlined many of them. In addition, we're seeing a prolific use of guns and gun weapons in the community. So I just think it's a good opportunity to sit down with the premiers, looking for their support as we try to tackle some of these complex problems.
And you're saying that policing is at a crossroads in Canada amid this rise in violent crime. Can you tell us a little bit more about what you mean by this?
Well, in part, often we're used to seeing news in the United States, and all of a sudden we are seeing a number of officer deaths. We've had 8 officers killed since September in violent, random kind of incidents. We're not used to that in Canada, and it's pretty alarming. I'll tell you, I was in Edmonton just a couple of weeks ago for the funeral there, and I didn't even wake up the next morning to discover yet another death in Quebec. So these are coming much quicker than we're used to in Canada, and we're seeing a lot of the same overlap. Certainly, guns is coming into play, mental health is coming into play. There are instances where some of the offenders that were involved in these were repeat offenders that were out on bail. As much as the focus is on police, I should point out that there's just as much harm in our communities that's occurring as well. So I just think these are timely things to try to sit down and discuss.
Meanwhile, all of this comes amid some criticism against policing in Canada, sir. We know there are concerns around racism, abuse of power, and even calls to potentially defund or reduce funding for policing services. So where does the Canadian Association of Chiefs of Police stand when it comes to these concerns in particular?
Well, I think accountability and transparency is built into our system. That is one of the big distinctions in Canada compared to some of our fellow organizations in the United States. Most provinces have legislation that prescribes independent investigations when police are involved in any incidents that involve injury or death. Most services have regulations that address things like abuse of authority. So I do think the system is there. Can it improve? Always it can improve, but I think we're well served in Canada to address many of the concerns that have been brought forward.
And you previously mentioned that policing should be part of the strategy when it comes to addressing these issues. So what does being part of the strategy look like for policing in Canada?
Well, I think Alberta is a good example where I saw, a lot of city, local council governments debating whether they should defund police and go in a different direction without actually involving the police. And then oftentimes you'll see provinces, talking a different message. Our members are hearing a very mixed message depending on what jurisdiction you're in. I don't think there can be public safety in Canada without the police. And I think it's important for us to be at the table. The police aren't the only part of the solution, but we're a big part of it.
All right, Chief Smyth, just about 45 seconds left here, but what would a successful meeting with the Council of the Federation look like?
Well, in part, I think just from a morale perspective, just having their support publicly would go a long way for our members. But as you saw, after the death of the OPP officer in December, just seeing the premiers come together and use their influence to try to make some changes to bail reform goes a long way to addressing some of the concerns that we've brought forward. I would argue that additional resources in mental health and addictions would also give us the opportunity to divert people into programming as opposed to using the justice system.
We look forward to following the developments of this meeting. Chief Smyth, thank you again for your time today.
Thank you for your interest.
On the International Day of Human Spaceflight, Canada continues to play a significant role in the continued exploration of space, as well as the development of new space technology. Last week, Canada joined the United States in its efforts to expand our current reach beyond the moon and the stars. This with the Canadian Space Agency's Jeremy Hansen becoming the first Canadian astronaut to take part in lunar exploration with the Artemis II mission. Meanwhile, Canadian tech companies are already expanding their technologies to prepare for a new era of spaceflight. Well, joining us now to tell us more about Canada's role outside Earth's atmosphere is Mr. Pradeep Das, President and Chief Technology Officer of Space Engine Systems. Mr. Das, welcome to Forum Daily.
Thank you. Thank you for having us.
Thank you for joining us. So what do we know so far about the Artemis II mission and its primary objective?
Yeah, Artemis II is going to send 4 astronauts around the moon or the lunar mission. And one of the astronauts is definitely Canadian. We're all proud about that. And I'm sure the Canadian government has worked really hard to get this thing done.
Definitely proud of Canada's involvement in this. So how does Canada's cooperation in this mission currently impact its presence in global space exploration?
I think this is the easiest or the least expensive path to the lunar mission, partnering with NASA. I think it's a wonderful thing, and it will promote engineering, both in aerospace and also space all around Canada. It'll bring about a lot of excitement, especially in universities, and which we are struggling to hire. So this will be excellent approach.
And we know the Artemis II mission, the broader goal here is to create a durable lunar presence, all to pave the way for human exploration of Mars. So how far away are we from a goal like that? Do we have a timeline?
Timelines are difficult in space. One of the things is that you've got to plan for failures instead of planning for success. So I would say that we're probably 7 to 10 years away before we land on Mars. But having a base on lunar mission is a prerequisite before we look into anything else. It's probably 1/6 the gravity of Earth. We can have a base there if you've got water out there, and if you've got a business case, that's the most important thing. As long as there's a business case, I think it'll move forward.
And on that note, what does a durable lunar presence look like?
It could be a whole thing. It could be fuel. If there's enough water out there in different forms, it could be converted to hydrogen. That's fuel for any type of rockets to fly. So, and if there's oxygen, and definitely if there's water, there's oxygen that you can get from water, and that is something will sustain life. So there's a lot of planning to do. It's a very difficult path. But I think it can be done. It takes more time, being really careful, minimize any kind of failures.
All right, just about 2 minutes here, but I definitely want to switch gears and talk a little bit about Space Engine Systems. Can you briefly tell us about the role your company is playing as Canada expands our presence in space?
Space Engine Systems is focused on lunar mission in the first place. So we set up in 2011, focused on lunar mission. We are doing but we have to do a whole bunch of stuff before we get there. One is the Hello 1X, and that is the demonstrator vehicle, which will go up to 32 kilometers. It's for point to point, and then we'll come back and land. And we hope to fly that this year from the US, subject to FAA approval. We have not submitted the application yet, but we're putting the whole thing together. We have set up a company in the US called Space Engine System USA Inc., and another one at Cornwall in UK called Space Engine System Limited. So in Cornwall, we have a partnership with Cornwall Council for hypersonics going forward. So definitely, we're aiming for the lunar mission, and we think just past 2025, we should be ready, assuming that we don't have multiple failures. So our company is based on how many failures can we sustain instead of the success. Success is a given, but we're planning for the number of failures we can sustain before we get to the lunar mission.
Definitely something to look forward to. Now, is there anything that you're keeping your eyes on in the lead up to the Artemis 2 mission? Just about 30 seconds left here, Mr. Das.
Definitely, we are looking and hoping that this will be 100% success. And any failure would set it back. And I just hope there's a business case built up instead of looking at what China is doing or what Russia is doing. If you create a business case, it will sustain. Because you must understand, more than 50 years ago, US has landed on the moon. So it's not exotic. They've done it before. And we are doing it after 50-something years. So as long as there's a business case, this is going to move forward. And there's helium-3 and other mining areas we can look on the moon.
We'll be right back. As more Canadian companies look to offer or boost fertility coverage for employees, concerns surrounding infertility continue to grow for both men and women. According to a 2022 review published in the journal Human Reproduction Update, human sperm counts have fallen by over 50% worldwide over the past 50 years. A report by the Canadian Fertility and Andrology Society finds that female infertility for women between the ages of 15 and 45 occurs in 8% of couples in Canada. Meanwhile, as the labor market and specialized fields continue to become more competitive, a growing number of Canadian companies are offering fertility perks to their benefits. This includes IVF treatments, adoption, and surrogacy. But with concerns around infertility growing, what could be behind this trend, and can this be prevented? Well, joining us now to unpack these concerns in our weekly medical segment is Dr. Abhishek Raut, Medical Director at Appletree Medical Group. Dr. Raut, welcome back to Forum Daily.
Good evening, Nima.
So let's start with the findings around male infertility. What do we know so far about this, Dr. Raut, and the state of male fertility in Canada currently?
Right. So with the natural male reproduction, it really depends on two things: to make healthy sperm and then to have an erection and ejaculate so that the sperm can reach the egg. So any problems with either of those can cause male infertility issues. Typically, we see these also in infections or inflammatory conditions, for example, mumps after puberty. You can have hormonal issues as well that cause that. There are immune problems that make antibodies against your own sperm. And there are also a lot of environmental and lifestyle factors: tobacco use, heavy alcohol use, for instance. And then finally, we do see genetic issues such as cystic fibrosis or hemochromatosis and injury causing it as well. In Canada, among couples with infertility, male factors are identified as about 30% sole cause and contributing cause about 20% as well.
So considering these ongoing factors, Dr. Raut, do you see this sort of downward trend when it comes to male fertility rates continuing?
Yeah, well, if we look at obesity and lifestyle, for instance, obesity rates are certainly not decreasing in Canada. If anything, we're seeing an increase. We have about 26% of our population currently obese, and we do see that amongst children and adolescents, that's increasing. So likely we will see an increase in some of these lifestyle-related issues there for the downward trend.
Some concerning information, Dr. Raut. Now, what about female infertility? What do we know so far about trends around this globally and in Canada?
Right. So what we see worldwide is about 1 in 6 of the population experiences infertility, and about 30% of that, again, is related strictly to female infertility. There's some differences in race and ethnicity as well, but overall, we are seeing that the infertility rates are increasing as well, unfortunately, in the world and in Canada.
So what were found to be the major causes of female infertility? Were they similar to the causes behind male infertility?
That's right. So stop me if you've heard this one, but basically what we're seeing is hormonal issues here as well. So for women, it would be PCOS or dysfunction of the hypothalamus. You can also have structural issues, fallopian tube damage from things like pelvic inflammatory disease. But there are also other specific issues like endometriosis or fibroids or polyps that can also cause a lot of issues that can be quite frustrating for everyone involved. And finally, we do see quite a few cases that we just never know the reason, which of course can be equally frustrating there.
Frustrating indeed, Dr. Raut. Now, I guess let's talk about solutions. Are there any preventative measures that Canadians can take themselves to maybe protect or maintain their fertility?
Right. Yeah. So when we look at the causes, we see a lot of hormonal causes and we see a lot of lifestyle causes as well. So focusing on the lifestyle causes and fixing the hormonal causes are key. So decreasing or minimizing smoking, alcohol use, decreasing your weight or removing weight fluctuations, and stress can certainly contribute to that. So having those lifestyle factors in check are very, very helpful.
All right, Dr. Raut, about a minute left here, but what role should employers play when it comes to supporting population growth and the issue of fertility of their employees, if at all?
Right. So it's interesting because IVF, which is the big discussion here, is the most effective form of assisted reproductive technology, and of course the most expensive as well. So I think when we look at employers, the big concern is going to be that fertility or infertility is going to be a huge issue as time goes by. It certainly is a big issue now. So to be competitive, employers will really need to offer the best package, including salary vacation, and I think it would be very advantageous to also add IVF treatments as part of that package.
All right, Dr. Raut, another great interview. Thank you again for your time today.
Great. Thanks so much for having me.
All right, I'm Nima Rajan, and that'll do it for your look at important conversations from this past week. Remember, for more news on demand, you could always visit our website, thenewsforum.ca, and make sure to follow us on Facebook, TikTok, Instagram, and Twitter for updates. You could also watch all of our programming on the News Forum YouTube channel. All right, stay tuned for other programs on our network. We have commentary shows on economics, politics, social issues, and more, so stay tuned for that. But thanks again for joining us today on Forum Daily Week in Review, and we'll see you again next time. Have a great weekend, Canada.